So hi, I'm Peter Gray, and I'll be picking up on a couple strands, including the baby strand we just heard about, as well as a little bit on clothing and sex, and there'll be more on some of these topics, including sex, I know to come. So this is to keep you alert and excited. What do dogs have to do with this story? We'll see. I once gave a talk where there was a dog in the audience. I don't think there is tonight. So this is the kind of stuff I obsess with. I have wide-ranging interests, of which these are focal, but my interests also incorporate a host of other things. Where does that trace to? Well, my earliest foray to Vegas, I was 4. Anyone remember the Stardust? Gone, but not forgotten. 295 buffets. Gone, but not forgotten. There's my dad. And look at our horrible clothing from the 70s, and me doing silly things. More recently, I do stuff like think and write, rather than go to Hoover Dam and stick my tongue out. So that's included a co-authored book in 2010 on fatherhood, and more recently this book came out earlier this year, Evolution and Human Sexual Behavior. I didn't come up with the cover, they did, the marketing folks, but this is meant to be a book that's integrative, accessible, and et cetera on sexual behavior. If we're going to talk about an evolutionary perspective, we have to talk about these guys, Darwin and Wallace. Interestingly, Wallace in his autobiography from 1905 points to Nevada's impact on his personal life. He lost money in mining investments in England, thanks to Nevada, up north mainly, but that was why he had to go on a speaking tour later in his life. At any rate, these folks get us thinking about evolution, Darwin's case, sexual selection. That's part of an integrative study of human reproduction. These are some of the other lines of evidence we draw upon to have the most integrative story that should be coherent and connect with other disciplines as well, not just in my corner of the social or biomedical sciences. So with respect to those kinds of evidence, we can talk about our primate kin, like the apes. Gorillas live in one male groups, for example. Our close kin may have skeletons that look a lot like ours, bones pretty much the same, but their reproductive behavior can be quite different. And there's also shifts that have occurred in our own ancestors' reproductive behavior, particularly the last 2 million years as things have changed. One thing that's stamped evolution stamped its way into our reproductive anatomy, testicle size. I bet guys never thought of this, but how big your testicles are is related to relative sperm competition pressures. Females of chimps and other multi-male mating species tend to have males with larger testes. Humans are a little bit smaller. Looks like there has not been as much multi-male mating compared to those creatures. At any rate, those are the kinds of reasons, or kinds of lines of evidence that lead us to think that our recent ancestors, slightly polygynous, low sperm competition pressures, and that also meshes with the hunter-gatherer literature. Hunter-gatherers like the Hadza, one of my colleagues, Alyssa Crittenden, studies in Tanzania, in which they're slightly polygynous. A few guys with 2 wives, most with 1. However, against that evolutionary backdrop, reproductive behavior is undergoing dramatic changes. More and more people are foregoing marriage, cohabitating, fertility is changing. Polygyny is also on the decline, although recently there was a Sister Wives episode aired that was filmed at UNLV, so that's neat. We're living in an area where this is still a discussion point, but fertility is indeed going down. I taught in Singapore 2 summers through UNLV's satellite campus. There, on average, women are having 1.2 kids. So fertility is going down, below replacement fertility in over 1/3 of countries on this planet. What is that connected to? A host of factors behind that. But who needs kids when you've got dogs? So come on in, dogs. If you can tend to your fur child, your fur baby, especially for young couples, this is in a sense an emotional surrogate, you could argue, of having your own child. And I think for older couples like my parents, it's the empty nester syndrome. They invest a lot in their dog, and you can even give them acupuncture. However, that's not representative. If we look cross-culturally, as a grad student Sharon Young and I did in this review paper, we don't find many cases of that extreme investment or the financial trajectory that we're now seeing that's also been recession-proof, interestingly. But instead, you see much more ambivalent treatment of animals like dogs. You saw the breastfeeding one, but that's another story, I guess. This is a collaborative project with several students. One said, well, if we know from the human parenting literature there are differences in attachment and investment in step and biological parents that are worthy of study, what about those who adopt dogs versus move into households where there are dogs, and we can call them step dog owners? There were differences. That was what that story was. You might have heard of that on the RJ and such last year. I also do work on testosterone and male behavior in humans, and this ties into wide discussions that we draw upon in comparative frameworks. Broadly speaking, testosterone can promote anatomical, physiological, behavioral mating or reproductive effort. What's the evidence? Here's a study done off of Sahara at an adult club. have guys spit before and after going into an adult club. Those who participate in sexual behavior versus observe had higher increases in testosterone during their time at this adult club. With a sample size of 44, it's the largest naturalistic study of human testosterone responses to sexual stimuli. The flip side of the coin, though, is in what context do men's testosterone decrease? That can be with respect to intimate family life, long-term partnerships, paternal care. Colleagues and I have done a good number of the cross-sectional studies. Now the gold standard is a longitudinal study from the Philippines, which showed 4.5 years later from baseline, guys who became dads, especially dads of young kids, had lower testosterone. So longitudinal. Well, what happens if you take testosterone? We've got Sonogenics off of Charleston. Ask these guys. We see them in the back of airline magazines as well as ads here in town by the airport. They don't ask about necessarily relationships. They should be asking that. But we ought to connect, I think, some of these dots with respect to a local opportunity to do research on testosterone and male behavior. To summarize a few strands then, long-term slightly polygynous sociosexual bonds, including paternal care, the fact I can care for my kids and love them and such. If I was a chimp, I probably wouldn't know who my kids were. Very different mating system, even though they're our closest living relatives. So this is part of our biology. To close with a few extensions of this topic, there's a literature that's growing on the impacts of parenting on sexuality, but it's mostly focused on partnered individuals. What about singles? I'm involved in a study now where single parents of young kids, underrepresented, fewer of them are separating to become young single parents probably of single kids, but surprisingly enough there weren't major differences. And then I'm struck by this, reading Triumph of the City, which I think has been an intellectual inspiration for the Downtown Project. Interestingly though, the author of that book left for the suburbs, and he gives reasons why. It's the spongy grass that he wants his kids to fall on rather than the concrete. But anyway, it's interesting you think about some of those contexts with respect to parenting, I think being an important dimension of some of this. And then overall, in the conclusion to this book, we point to the lower fertility many of us encountering. That can be linked to what biologists would call diminished parenting effort, more mating effort, and maybe we see that stamped in Vegas consumerism and such. So anyway, thanks.